ancient times will come from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
My name is Kip Davis. I'm a biblical scholar and a specialist in early Judaism and the Dead Sea Scrolls for probably the past decade now. All of my scholarly work has been really focused on the study and investigation of fragments that were sold to private collections in the 1990s and then the aughts between like 2000 and 2014, my own suspicions and the work of a number of other scholars who became convinced over this time that these fragments were forgeries.
What? Forgeries, you say? In documentation? In stuff that is ancient? I'm not even talking about forgeries loosely being translated as copies of ancient manuscripts making their way around town, around the local area, around Israel, around the Northern Kingdom, around the Middle East, around Egypt. I'm not talking about copies of stuff. I'm talking, really, about claims to be one thing that are demonstrably not what those claims are purported to be. Where is all this coming from? Well, it's all part of my quest for truth. If what you believe can't be supported by truth, then it's simply you're choosing to believe what you believe, and I'm not sure that it's sort of saying you might as well continue to believe in tooth fairy and garden gnomes, but it's close to that. There's, of course, the seriousness of practices of people who believed sincerely that what they were being told and what they were reading was real and true. Well, we'll get all to that in another area of this podcast, or maybe another podcast. My question is of forgeries in the Dead Sea Scrolls purporting to support claims made by Christian apologists, saying things that are suspect at best and outright false at worst. Either way, between those two, I'm not sure I'd want to hang my hat on this kind of stuff. So who are we talking about? Dr. Kip Davis is a Canadian Dead Sea Scrolls specialist. And what he's talking about is being asked to offer an opinion, a scholarly opinion, on documents, fragments that were attained by the Museum of the Bible in the United States about authenticity. How do you attest to or suspect that something is or is not what it claims to be? The Dead Sea Scrolls, just to go back, were those documents found in clay jars by Bedouin shepherd kids who ostensibly threw rocks in a cave and heard a clash of pottery breaking and investigated and found scrolls. And of course, this led to the big eruption of the claim of authenticity of the copying of scriptures. Because the earliest scripture up to that point, this is 1947, was the Masoretic text, which is sometimes claimed to be in the 7th century AD. 7th century AD, the oldest assembly in Hebrew. And of course there was the Septuagint, which was Greek, therefore somewhat suspect, just because it's not in Hebrew. Well, if you believe that the very shape of the letters is holy, as Islam claims about the Quran, then the equivalent would be that the Hebrew language is the equivalent of God writing with his fingers, being a divine language. Therefore, it is likely assumed that the Ten Commandments, for instance, were written in Hebrew so that everybody could see them. That kind of stuff is where we try to separate history from story, knowing that the story also serves a purpose which is not bad. It's just understand what it is and what it is not. separating fact from fiction, separating purpose and intent from actual evidence. That's part of where we're going. Well, Dr. Kip Davis was asked, he was contracted, I believe is the language that he used, to oversee an investigation into some fragments that were winding up in. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is the same collector who supplied, and this is where it ties into the present, and a coffee with my good friend Greg, who offered me a book called God Breathed, which is by Josh McDowell, who also wrote the first book that got me sailing down the path of apologetics, defending the authenticity, the historicity, the reliability of the Bible. And here I am, half a century later, talking about unapologetically, which is Dr. Davis' title of his web series on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So here is an eminent scholar, and he's talking about forgeries winding up in private collections by well-intended Christians. The Museum of the Bible. Well-intended because they genuinely want to find that these things are testimonies to the inerrancy, infallibility, the strictness with which the scriptures were copied by scribes over centuries. And of course, these scrolls were dated to the, 2nd century BCE? It's funny how that keeps on coming up to a significant sort of thought process. When was the Bible actually assembled and created? Is it as old as Moses wrote the Pentateuch, 1500 BCE? Or was it that David got his scribes to write down everything they knew and believed in some sort of kingdom record keeping in 1000 BCE? Or was it that after the post-exile, post-Babylonian exile, let's get back to Israel, we need to redefine ourselves because we've had the snot beaten out of us by foreign kingdoms and we're sent away into captivity, and we need to understand that this process is sinful, and if we stick to the path, stick to the dogma, then God won't be raining hellfire and damnation on us anymore. Is that the purpose of the collection? Purpose we may not ever get to, but documents have a beginning and an origin and a story. And the story is part of where my concern is, because we can make the story fit a narrative. And that's what I'm concerned about in terms of interpretation. What I am more concerned about is the truth behind the existence or non-existence of the claims. You can either find the evidence for it or you can't. And in a previous podcast, I was talking about the material culture. Well, papyrus, or leather bound in this case, is really kind of interesting and important. So let's see what Dr. Davis has to say about forgeries winding up in the Museum of the Bible.
1st of January, Sean McDowell, famous apologist who runs a very popular YouTube channel here, hosted a pre-recorded interview that he had with Dr. Craig A. Evans. He is a professor at Houston Baptist University, and he's a former teacher of mine, actually. When I was doing my master's degree, he was the second reader on my MA thesis, while we were both still at Trinity Western, way back in the late 90s. So in this interview, Dr. Evans was providing an update about all these fake fragments that were widely publicized in between 2017 and 2020 as part of this large project that I had been working on for that full decade. So as you can imagine, I was keenly interested to hear what happened in this interview. And this brings us to what's taking place here today. What I saw was surprising, to say the least. It was really quite shocking. Basically, Dr. Evans took the opportunity in this interview to provide what he believed to be new information, which actually exonerated all the fragments in all the private collections.
To justify the authenticity of all the fragments in all the collections, all being authentic. What a sweeping claim. The irony is that the claim was being made on a YouTube channel. Now, call me naive, but, even I don't believe that something released first time ever released to your audience, Sean McDowell, son of Josh McDowell, whose interest is in apologetics, proving that your case is rock solid or leather solid or paper solid, as the case may be, depending on the document you're talking about. Yeah, it doesn't quite work that way. And publicity is publicity, but to vainly make broad sweeping claims when you are not the scholar in charge seems to be a little suspect.
So we're into something that it's going to be quite astonishing. It's going to generate a lot of conversation. And to the best of my knowledge, you were the first to hear this, the first to air it.
First of all, I think we need to talk a little bit about the venue here. Both Sean and Dr. Evans make a big deal here about this being big breaking news that he is announcing for the first time on Sean's channel. I have to ask, what are we doing here? With this sort of explosive information, with the magnitude of what Evans is about to announce, why are we doing this on a YouTube channel belonging to a Christian apologist? The proper place for this kind of break is in a scholarly publication, or minimally through an established media outlet, although, there's lots of problems with that in and of itself. So this was confusing to me, why Dr. Evans would choose to make these massive announcements on Sean's YouTube.
Well, that's the start of it. Why would he choose that venue? I would say it serves the purpose, as most of these things do. Propaganda, preaching to the choir, to those who already believe. Well, it's hard to open eyes once you've already drank from the well. Well, that's enough said. I have a lot of questions, always questions. Questions of sources, question of authenticity, question of who do you believe and why, question of fact, fiction, evidence that demands a verdict, or not so much.